The sat phone call came through at 3:47 hours, crackling with static and something worse, fear. Commander Victor Harlan didn't scare easily. 22 years with DEVGRU, 4 continents, operations that would never see declassification. But his voice carried an edge that made the duty officer at Bagram sit up straighter. "We need close air support. Now, not in 20 minutes. Now." The line went quiet except for distant automatic weapons fire. "Then tell them it's grid November 7-4, the Valley." The duty officer's hand froze over the keyboard. November 7-4 wasn't just a grid reference. It was a graveyard. 16 aircraft had gone into that box canyon in 3 different wars. None had come out intact. The Soviets called it Dolina Ognia, Valley of Fire. Taliban fighters called it something else, something that translated roughly to where American birds go to die. The ridgelines formed a natural kill box, studded with caves and firing positions that had been fortified for 40 years. MANPADs, heavy machine guns, even a rumored Zu-23 that had downed a Chinook in 2019. Air support didn't go there. Period. The duty officer pulled up available assets. 3 F-16s were cycling back from a strike package near Kandahar, too far. An Apache team was grounded for maintenance. A B-1 was on station but couldn't get ordnance close enough without leveling the friendly position. He was about to call back with negative when a notation appeared on his screen. Single A-10C Thunderbolt II returning from a reconnaissance run along the Pakistani border. Call sign, Fury 11. Pilot, Captain Raven Keller. The duty officer hesitated. He'd heard the name. Everyone had. She'd been flying combat missions since she was 24, back when half the squadron still thought women pilots were a PR stunt. 8 years later, she held the squadron record for danger-close gun runs and had a reputation for 2 things: never breaking protocol and never leaving anyone behind. But this wasn't a normal mission. This was November 7-4. He pulled up her service jacket. Daughter of a crop duster from Nebraska, she'd learned to fly in her father's old Cessna before she could drive. Commissioned through ROTC, graduated top of her class advance, then went straight to the A-10 when most pilots were lobbying for F-35s. Her call sign wasn't random. During her first deployment, she'd flown through a sandstorm to extract a Green Beret team, navigation systems dead, flying by instinct and memory alone. One of the survivors said she came out of nowhere like something from mythology. The name stuck. The duty officer keyed the radio. "Fury 11, this is Bagram Actual. We have a priority tasking. How copy?" The response came back smooth, almost casual, but with an undertone of steel that suggested she already knew this wasn't routine. "Bagram Actual, Fury 11, send it." He read off the grid coordinates. There was a pause, not long, maybe 3 seconds, but in that silence, he imagined her processing what those numbers meant. Every pilot knew November 7-4. It was discussed in ready rooms as a hypothetical, the scenario you hoped never to receive. When she spoke again, her voice hadn't changed. "Fury 11 copies, proceeding to November 7-4, ETA 12 minutes. Advise ground commander to mark position with IR strobe and get heads down. I'm coming in hot." The duty officer felt something tighten in his chest. "Fury 11, be advised that valley is—" "I know what it is." Her words cut clean. "Tell Harlan to hold on. I'm not losing anyone today." The connection ended. On the radar screen, a single green triangle banked hard west, accelerating toward the mountains. The duty officer watched it for a moment, then picked up the secure line to the operations center. They needed to know. Someone was actually going into the Valley of Fire. He didn't say what he was thinking, that in 12 minutes they might be calling in a search and rescue for one of their own. The A-10 disappeared into the mountains, swallowed by terrain clutter on the radar. All they could do was wait. In the valley, Commander Harlan pressed himself against the rock face, rounds snapping overhead. His team was down to 4 effectives, pinned in a dried riverbed with nowhere to go. The mission had been simple on paper: interdict a high-value target moving through the valley under cover of darkness. But simple never survived contact. They'd walked into an ambush that suggested someone had been waiting. Now they were taking fire from three sides, ammunition running low, and the sky above was turning from black to gray. Dawn was coming. With daylight, they'd be sitting ducks. His radio operator, Lieutenant Marcus Wade, looked at him with a question in his eyes. Harlan had seen that look before. It was the look that asked if this was how it ended. He was about to answer when they heard it. Faint at first, almost lost under the gunfire. A sound like distant thunder, but steady, mechanical. Growing closer. The A-10's twin turbofan engines produced a distinctive howl, different from every other aircraft in the inventory. Low, guttural, like something ancient and angry. Then they saw her. She came over the eastern ridge at 200 feet, lower than any fixed-wing aircraft had a right to be, the gray and green camouflage paint scheme making her almost invisible against the dawn. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately called the Warthog, was never beautiful. It was brutal. Built around a 7-barrel GAU-8 Avenger cannon that could spit 30mm rounds at nearly 4,000 per minute, the aircraft looked like someone had strapped wings to a gun. Slow by modern standards, tough as hell, and absolutely lethal at close range. Fury 11 banked hard, wings nearly vertical, then rolled out heading straight up the valley. Harlan knew what came next. Inside the cockpit, Captain Raven Keller's hands moved with practiced precision. Throttles forward, trim adjusted, eyes scanning the heads-up display while simultaneously processing the landscape below. She'd studied November 7-4 during mission planning, memorized the ridgelines and elevation changes. Knowledge was survival. Her situational awareness data link showed the friendly position, 4 green diamonds clustered in the riverbed. Around them, her targeting pod painted multiple heat signatures. Muzzle flashes, lots of them. She keyed the radio. Fury 11 is tally on friendlies. Harlan, I need you to mark your closest threat. Strobe or smoke, your choice, but make it fast. Harlan's voice came back clipped. North ridgeline 30 meters up from our position. Heavy machine gun emplacement. They've got us zeroed. Raven's eyes flicked to the targeting pod display. She saw it. A Sanger position reinforced, probably connected to the cave system. The smart play was to come around for a proper attack run, set up the shot from altitude. But smart plays took time, and time was something Harlan didn't have. She punched the radio. Harlan, in 10 seconds, you and your boys become very small and very still. Don't move until I tell you. She didn't wait for confirmation. The A-10 dropped lower, now at 150 feet, well below the ridgeline. Anyone with a rifle could hit her. That was the gamble. Her left hand moved to the weapons panel, selecting the gun. The HUD updated, displaying the firing solution. She'd have maybe 2 seconds in the kill zone. 2 seconds to identify, engage, and pull out before she flew into the mountain. Standard procedure said this was insane. Standard procedure hadn't met Raven Keller. The A-10 roared up the canyon, engine noise echoing off stone walls. On the ridgelines, Taliban fighters tracked her movement, lifting weapons. Several MANPAD teams tried to acquire lock, but she was too low, too fast, masked by terrain. She pulled back on the stick, climbing just enough to clear the riverbed, and that's when they saw her angle of attack. She wasn't pulling away. She was pointing directly at them. Raven's finger found the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted with a sound that defied description. Some called it a belch. Others said it sounded like fabric tearing, but amplified 1,000 times. BRRRRT. The nose of the aircraft lit up, muzzle flashed like lightning. 30mm depleted uranium rounds streaked downrange at 3,000 feet per second. Each round weighed nearly a pound and carried enough kinetic energy to penetrate tank armor. What they did to reinforced stone was catastrophic. The Sanger position on the north ridgeline disintegrated. Rock, sandbags, metal, and flesh, all converted to debris in less than 2 seconds. The heavy machine gun that had been hammering Harlan's position simply ceased to exist. Raven pulled hard on the stick, climbing, banking, already looking for the next threat. Her breathing stayed even, heart rate controlled. This was the dance. Find, fix, strike. Move before they could respond. The radio crackled, Harlan's voice tight with adrenaline. Fury 11, that's a direct hit. We've got more on the west ridge elevation. I see them. She was already rolling in, lining up the next pass. Below, the remaining fighters scrambled, some running for better cover, others trying to bring weapons to bear on this aircraft that refused to leave. They'd never faced anything like this. Most American jets stayed high, dropped their bombs from safety. This one came close, personal, looking them in the eye. Raven made 3 more gun runs in the next 4 minutes, each one surgically precise. She demolished 2 more machine gun positions, scattered a group trying to flank Harlan from the south, and put a long burst into a cave entrance that had been producing RPG fire. The A-10 absorbed several hits, small arms fire that sparked off armored plates protecting the cockpit and engines. She felt one round impact somewhere aft, a dull thunk transmitted through the airframe. Damage indicators stayed green. The Warthog was built to take punishment. After the 4th pass, the return fire dropped to nothing. The fighters who could run had melted into the mountains. The ones who couldn't weren't a problem anymore. Raven climbed to 5,000 feet, circling the valley, eyes scanning for movement. Her fuel gauge showed 25 minutes remaining. Enough. Harlan, Fury 1-1. Looks like you've got a clear path east. I'm going to stay overhead, make sure nobody gets brave. The response came back after a moment. Fury 1-1, Harlan, He paused, and she could hear something in that pause, not just relief, something else. I don't know what to say, we thought we were done. Raven's grip on the stick loosened slightly. You're not done, Commander. Get your people moving. I'll call in extract coordinates once you're clear of the valley. She watched the 4 green diamonds on her display begin to move, slowly at first, then faster as they realized they actually had a chance. 15 minutes later, a combat rescue helicopter vectored in from the east, picked up Harlan and his team, and disappeared back toward Bagram. Raven stayed overhead until they were clear, then turned south toward home. The sun was fully up now, painting the Hindu Kush in shades of gold and shadow. Beautiful country for such an ugly war. When she landed at Bagram 90 minutes later, there was a crowd on the tarmac. Unusual. Ground crews, pilots, support staff, all watching as she taxied in. Raven shut down the engines, went through post-flight checks, and finally popped the canopy. The heat hit her immediately, desert sun already baking the concrete. She climbed down, legs stiff from 4 hours in the seat, and found Commander Harlan waiting at the bottom of the ladder. He was still wearing his combat kit, face streaked with dust and sweat. His team stood behind him, looking at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Harlan extended his hand. Captain Keller, I've been flying missions for 2 decades, never seen anything like that. Raven shook his hand, keeping her face neutral. Just doing my job, Commander. Your job, he almost smiled. Ma'am, with respect, your job description doesn't include flying into a kill box that's been off-limits since the Soviet invasion. You know how many pilots turned down that tasking? She didn't answer. Harlan continued. 3 F-16 jocks said negative when ops first tried. Too risky, they said, too confined, and they weren't wrong, but you didn't hesitate. I hesitated for 3 seconds, Raven said quietly. Long enough to know what I was getting into. Harlan studied her face. Why'd you do it? Raven looked past him at the mountains in the distance. Because you needed someone, and I had the gas. It was the simplest answer she could give, the truest. Later that evening, the squadron commander called her into his office. Colonel Preston Marks was career Air Force, a former A-10 pilot himself who'd flown in Desert Storm. He gestured for her to sit. Hell of a morning, Keller. Yes, sir. DEVGRU commander already called. Said you saved 4 of his best operators. Marks leaned back in his chair, studying her. He also said he's never seen flying like that. Low altitude, confined terrain, multiple gun runs without standoff weapons. You know that's not how we normally employ the A-10. Raven kept her expression neutral. Sir, ground commander needed immediate fire support. Precision weapons would have taken time to coordinate. The gun was the fastest option. The gun, Marks nodded slowly. You put yourself in small arms range. Took hits. Aircraft sustained minor damage. All systems remained functional. That's not the point, Captain. His voice carried an edge now. The point is you took risks that another pilot might have avoided. Some would call that reckless. Raven met his eyes. With respect, sir, I call it necessary. Those men would be dead if I'd played it safe. Marks held her gaze for a long moment, then something shifted in his expression. You're right, and that's why I'm not chewing you out. But Keller understands something. You're the best close air support pilot in this squadron, maybe the best I've ever seen. That makes you valuable. It also makes you a target for every command element that wants to prove women can't hack it in combat roles. Raven felt her jaw tight. She'd heard variations of this her entire career. I'm aware, sir. I'm sure you are. But awareness and reality are different. There are still officers in this Air Force who think letting women fly combat missions was a mistake. Every time you succeed, it bothers them. And when you do something as audacious as what you pulled this morning, he trailed off, shaking his head. Let's just say the OPFOR won't be the only ones watching you. The squadron bar was louder than usual that night. Word had spread about November 7-4, and by the time Raven walked in, the story had already grown in the telling. Some versions had her flying at 50 feet. Others claimed she'd taken out 20 positions single-handedly. She grabbed a Coke from the cooler and found a corner table, hopping to avoid the attention. It didn't work. Captain Jake Merritt, one of the F-16 pilots, made his way over. Tall, confident, with the kind of easy swagger that came from flying fast jets. He'd been in-country for 3 months and made sure everyone knew about his air-to-air kill during a border skirmish. Heard you had an exciting morning, Keller. His tone carried something that might have been respect or might have been challenge. Hard to tell with Merritt. Just another day, Raven said evenly. Right. Just another day flying into a valley that's been off-limits for 4 decades. No big deal. He pulled up a chair without asking. You know they offered that tasking to our flight first, right? Raven didn't respond. Merritt continued. My flight lead looked at the grid coordinates and said no way. Too confined for our airframe, too many threats. Made the right call, tactically speaking. Probably did, Raven agreed. So why didn't you make the same call? Because I fly a different aircraft, different mission set. Because you fly a gun truck, Merritt corrected. An aircraft that hasn't been relevant since the Gulf War. Slow, vulnerable, obsolete. But you hog drivers act like you're flying something special. Raven took a sip of her Coke, letting the moment breathe. When she spoke, her voice was calm. The A-10 does one thing better than any other aircraft in the inventory. It saves lives when seconds matter. That's not obsolete, Merritt. That's essential. Essential, Merritt leaned back. Tell that to the procurement office trying to retire your entire airframe. Face it, Keller, close air support is moving to multi-role fighters. Precision weapons from altitude, safer, faster, more flexible. The Warthog is a relic. Raven set down her drink. You're right about one thing. Modern warfare is changing. But you know what doesn't change? Troops on the ground taking fire. And when that happens, they don't want an F-35 dropping a JDAM from 20,000 feet. They want an A-10 at low altitude with eyes on target and a gun that can put steel exactly where it needs to go. That's not obsolete. That's irreplaceable. Merritt opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a voice from across the bar. Leave her alone, Merritt. She just did something none of us would do. Lieutenant Sarah Park, an Apache pilot, raised her beer in a half-salute toward Raven. November 7-4, that's legend status right there. A few others echoed the sentiment, raising their drinks. Merritt stood, shaking his head. Whatever. Enjoy your moment, Keller. Just remember, courage and stupidity often look the same until the outcome is decided. You got lucky today. He walked away. Raven watched him go, feeling the familiar weight settle over her shoulders. This was the constant equation. Succeed and they called it luck. Fail and it proved women didn't belong. There was no neutral ground, no space to just be a pilot doing the job. Always watched, always judged, always needing to be twice as good to be considered half as capable. Park came over, sliding into the seat Merritt had vacated. Don't let him get to you. He's just mad because you made him look bad. I didn't make him look like anything, Raven said quietly. He made a tactical decision. Probably the right one for his aircraft. Maybe, but you made a different decision and 4 men are alive because of it. That's what matters. Park studied her for a moment. Can I ask you something? Raven nodded. When Ops called with those grid coordinates, what went through your head? 3 seconds, you said. What happens in 3 seconds? Raven considered the question. It was one she'd asked herself many times, trying to understand her own decision-making process. First second, I identified the location and calculated distance, fuel, weapon status. Second, I reviewed everything I knew about November 7-4, threat systems, terrain, approach vectors. Third second, I thought about who was on the ground. Harlan's team. Any team, doesn't matter who. Someone called for help. That's all I needed to know. Park shook her head slowly. Most pilots would have spent those 3 seconds finding reasons to say no. You spent them finding a way to say yes. That's the difference. She stood, clapped Raven on the shoulder, and headed back to her table. Raven sat alone for a while longer, watching the squadron unwind. These were good people mostly. Brave, skilled, committed. But she could feel the divide, subtle but present. The female pilots, Park, Lieutenant Maya Chen in the corner, Captain Aaron Walsh by the bar, they understood the extra burden. Every mission was an audition. Every success needed to be exceptional just to be considered adequate. The men didn't carry that weight. Couldn't, even if they wanted to. She finished her Coke and headed back to her quarters. Tomorrow there would be more missions, more targets, more opportunities to prove herself all over again. The cycle never ended. In the darkness, she lay on her bunk and thought about the moment over the valley. The moment when the A-10's nose lit up and the gun roared and everything else fell away. In that moment, there was no gender, no politics, no judgment, just physics and precision and the clean simplicity of cause and effect. She put rounds on target. The target stopped being a threat. The men on the ground lived. Everything else was noise. 3 days passed. Raven flew 2 more missions, routine interdiction, targets serviced with precision munitions from safe altitude. Professional, effective, unremarkable, the kind of missions that didn't make stories. Then Harlan requested her specifically. The tasking came through official channels. DVGRU was running another operation, this time in Helmand Province. High-value target, expected resistance, need for dedicated close air support. Harlan had submitted Fury 11 by name. Colonel Marks called her in again. "You're aware of this request?" "Yes, sir." "Harlan wants you overhead for the entire operation. 3 hours minimum, possibly longer. That's a lot of gas." A-10 can handle it with tanker support. I've done longer. Marks drummed his fingers on the desk. "Keller, I want to be clear. This isn't November 7-4. This is deliberate planning for a high-priority target. Harlan could have any asset in theater. He chose you. Do you know why?" Raven considered her answer carefully. "Because he trusts that I'll be there when needed, sir. That I won't leave until the job is done." "Trust." Marks nodded. "That's a valuable commodity in this business, especially for special operations. They don't throw that around lightly." He pulled up a file on his computer. "The target is a Tier 1 bomb maker. This individual is responsible for IEDs that have killed 43 coalition personnel in the last year. Actionable intelligence says he's meeting with suppliers tomorrow night. Harlan's team is going to interdict." "Understood, sir." The compound is in a populated area. Civilian structures within 200 meters. Rules of engagement will be tight, no room for error. Raven met his eyes. "Sir, I've never missed." "I know, that's why you're going." He closed the file. "But Keller, understand the stakes. Special operations is a community unto itself. They take care of their own, remember their own. If you perform well, you'll have their respect. That opens doors. But if something goes wrong, if there are civilian casualties or the mission fails with you overhead." He didn't need to finish. Raven understood perfectly. Success would be shared credit. Failure would be hers alone. "I won't let them down, sir." "See that you don't." 24 hours later, Raven was over Helmand Province at 15,000 feet, orbiting a grid square that contained Harlan's target. The night was clear, stars brilliant without atmospheric interference at altitude. Below, the compound appeared on her targeting pod, a rectangular structure with high walls, single entrance, several buildings inside the perimeter. Thermal imaging showed multiple heat signatures moving around. Harlan's team was still 20 minutes out, approaching on foot from the east. The plan was straightforward. They'd breach the compound, secure the target, and extract via helicopter. Raven's job was to provide overwatch and respond to any threats that emerged. Simple on paper. But simplicity evaporated on contact. She monitored the radio, listening to the team's progress. Harlan's voice, calm and measured, calling out checkpoints. The soft acknowledgments from his operators, professional, practiced, efficient. At 2:35 hours they reached the compound perimeter. Raven watched through the targeting pod as 8 figures, visible only through thermal imaging, stacked up at the entrance. 30 seconds of silence. Then Harlan's voice, breaching now. The operation went wrong in the first 60 seconds. Harlan's team blew the gate and entered the compound, flowing through with practiced precision. But the intelligence was incomplete. The compound didn't just house the bomb maker. It was also a staging area for a larger cell. What should have been 4 or 5 hostiles turned out to be 15. Raven watched the thermal display as chaos erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up inside the compound. The neat formation of Harlan's team broke apart as they took contact from multiple directions. Fury 1-1 Harlan, we have troops in contact, multiple hostiles inside the compound. Cannot break contact to withdraw. Raven's hands moved across the cockpit. Throttle back, descending to 10,000 feet for better sensor resolution. Harlan, I'm tally on your position. Describe threat locations. Multiple buildings. Hostiles are firing from second-story windows, both the north and south structures. We're pinned in the courtyard. Raven studied the display. She could see Harlan's team clustered near a wall, using it for cover. Heat signatures in the windows, exactly where he said. The geometry was terrible. Civilian structures immediately adjacent. Tight quarters. No room for error. She could use a precision weapon, but coordinate handoffs took time and the team was taking fire now. The gun was faster, more responsive, but at this range at night through a targeting pod, 1 degree of error translated to meters on the ground, civilian meters. Harlan, I can put a gun run on the north building, but I need absolute confirmation there are no friendlies or civilians in that structure. Stand by. 30 seconds felt like hours. Gunfire continued. Then, Fury 1-1, north building is hostile only. Civilians evacuated to the east compound. You are clear to engage. Raven took a breath. This was the moment, the kind of shot that defined careers or ended them. She rolled the A-10 into a dive, descending through 8,000 feet, lining up the approach vector. Her hands were steady, mind calculating angles, wind, drift, target motion. At 5,000 feet, she pulled back slightly, adjusting. The targeting pipper settled over the north building. Her finger touched the trigger. In that microsecond before firing, she thought about all the variables. Ballistics, trajectory, structural density. She thought about the lives below, Harlan's team depending on her precision, civilians in adjacent buildings who would die if she missed. She thought about every instructor who'd said women lacked the spatial awareness for combat flying, every evaluation that damned with faint praise, every time she'd had to be perfect when others were allowed to be merely competent. Then she stopped thinking and let training take over. The gun fired. A 2-second burst, 70 rounds of 30mm death screaming downrange at 3,000 feet per second. Through the targeting pod, she watched the north building's second floor disintegrate. Walls exploded outward, roof collapsed inward. The heat signatures inside vanished instantly. She pulled off target, climbing, already acquiring the south building. North structure neutralized. Rolling in on south building. Stand by. No hesitation this time. She'd proven the shot. The second burst was equally precise, equally devastating. When the dust settled, literally and figuratively, the courtyard was clear of hostile fire. Harlan's team moved immediately, entering the main structure, securing the target. 8 minutes later, they had their man and were moving to the extraction point. The entire engagement, from first shot to wheels up on the extraction bird, took 14 minutes. Raven stayed overhead until the helicopter disappeared eastward, then turned for home. The debrief was extensive. Harlan's team had recovered significant intelligence along with the bomb maker, hard drives, documents, cell phones, a treasure trove that would fuel operations for months. The precision of Raven's gun runs became a case study. 2 engagements, 0 collateral damage, 0 friendly fire incidents. Textbook. But it was what Harlan said at the end of the debrief that stuck with her. Gentlemen, he addressed the room full of officers, I've worked with every kind of air support in every theater. I've had Apache overhead, AC-130s, fast movers with JDAMs. All excellent, but what Captain Keller did last night was different. That wasn't just close air support, that was surgery at night, in a populated area with friendly's danger close, and she made it look routine. He turned to face her directly. "Ma'am, my team would go anywhere with you overhead. Anywhere." "That's the highest compliment I can give." The room was silent. Several of the officers present had been openly skeptical about women in combat roles. Now they were seeing what capability looked like without the lens of gender. Some would change their thinking, others never would. Raven simply nodded. "Thank you, Commander. Honor to support you." After the debrief, Colonel Marks pulled her aside. "You're building a reputation, Keller. Special Operations community is talking about you. That's rare for a conventional asset." "Just doing my job, sir." "Stop saying that." His voice carried an edge. "What you're doing is exceptional and you need to own it. Humility is admirable, but in this Air Force, if you don't advocate for yourself, no one else will, especially," he paused, "especially for female officers. The system isn't built to recognize your achievements automatically. You have to make them impossible to ignore." Raven considered his words. It went against every instinct she had. She'd been raised to let actions speak, to avoid drawing attention, to simply be so good they couldn't deny her. But Marks was right. Being good wasn't enough. Being exceptional wasn't enough. She had to be undeniable. "What are you suggesting, sir?" "I'm suggesting you start thinking about your next step. You've maxed out what you can do as a captain flying line missions. You should be instructing, shaping doctrine, preparing the next generation. But that requires promotion, and promotion requires visibility." He handed her a folder. "There's a weapons school nomination in there. It's due next week. I want you to submit." Weapons school. The Air Force's graduate-level program for tactical employment. The best pilots learning from the best instructors, becoming experts in their airframe and mission. Graduation meant a patch on your shoulder and instant credibility. It also meant 6 months of the most challenging flying she'd ever do. "I'll think about it, sir." "Don't think too long. Opportunities have expiration dates." She took the folder back to her quarters and opened it. The nomination form stared back at her, blank and full of possibility. If she did this, there would be no hiding. Weapons school was public, visible. She'd be competing directly against the best pilots in the Air Force, evaluated constantly, every flight graded. One more stage where she'd be the only woman in the room. One more chance to prove herself or fail spectacularly. She thought about her father flying his crop duster over Nebraska fields. He'd never had these choices, these complications. For him, flying was simple. You went up, did the job, came back down. She envied that simplicity even as she knew she could never return to it. Her phone buzzed, a text from Lieutenant Park. "Drinks at the bar, you need to come, trust me." Raven almost declined, then changed her mind. Sometimes the best decisions came from not overthinking. The bar was packed, unusual for a Thursday night. As soon as Raven walked in, she understood why. Someone had organized a gathering for Harlan's team before they rotated back to the States. The DEVGRU operators were there, still in their standard casual clothes that somehow still looked tactical, and they were waiting for her. Harlan saw her first. "There she is, the reason we're all still breathing." The room broke into applause. Raven felt her face flush. This wasn't her scene. She preferred the quiet competence of the cockpit to the noise of recognition. But Harlan wasn't done. "Captain Keller, my team wanted to do something before we left. We don't usually do this for conventional assets, but you're not usual." He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside was a DEVGRU unit coin, the kind they gave to members of their own community. "This is from all of us. You've earned a place in our history." Raven took the coin, feeling its weight. On one side, the DEVGRU trident. On the other, an engraving, Fury 11, November 74, "The Valley Remembers." She looked up at Harlan, momentarily at a loss for words. Thank you, this means more than you know." "You mean more than you know," Harlan replied. "You gave us our lives back twice. That's not a debt we forget." One of his operators, a quiet man with a scar on his jaw, spoke up. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen pilots panic, seen them break off when things got hot. You never wavered, not once. That's warrior shit right there." The coin stayed in Raven's pocket for the rest of the night, a physical reminder that competence transcended politics. These men didn't care about her gender. They cared that she'd been there when needed, that her rounds had been accurate, that she'd stayed overhead until they were safe. That was the only currency that mattered. 2 weeks later, she submitted her weapons school nomination. Colonel Marks processed it immediately, adding his recommendation. The response came back in 48 hours. Accepted. She'd report to Nellie's Air Force Base in Nevada in 60 days. The news spread through the squadron quickly. Some reactions were supportive. Lieutenant Park hugged her, practically bouncing with excitement. "You're going to crush it. First woman to graduate A-10 weapons school in how long?" "4 years," Raven said. "Last one washed out after 3 weeks." Park's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "Oh, well, you're different. You've got combat experience, real-world results. They can't ignore that." But others were less enthusiastic. Captain Merritt cornered her in the ops building. "Heard you're going to weapons school. Brave move." "Thank you. Wasn't a compliment. You know the washout rate, right? 30%. And that's for pilots who don't have extra eyes watching, waiting for them to fail." Raven kept her voice level. "I'm aware of the statistics. Are you aware that if you wash out, it sets back every female pilot in this Air Force? They'll say it proves women can't handle the pressure. But if you graduate, they'll say standards were lowered. Can't win, Keller. The game is rigged." "Maybe," Raven agreed. "Or maybe I just fly the aircraft and let the results speak." Merritt shook his head. "Naive, but good luck anyway. You'll need it." He walked away, leaving Raven with the familiar weight of expectation. He wasn't wrong. She was carrying more than her own reputation to Nellie's. She was carrying the implied competence of every woman who'd follow. The burden was exhausting, unfair, and inescapable. That night she called her father. He answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the slow cadence of the Midwest. "Raven, good to hear from you. How's the flying?" "Challenging. I got accepted to weapons school." Silence on the line. "Then that's a big deal, isn't it?" "Biggest in my career so far. 6 months of advanced tactical training. If I graduate, it opens a lot of doors." "If you graduate," he repeated the conditional. "You planning on something other than graduating?" Despite everything, Raven smiled. Her father had never doubted her. When other girls were playing with dolls, he'd been teaching her airspeed calculations. When her high school guidance counselor suggested nursing school, he'd handed her a flight manual. He'd never seen a ceiling she couldn't break. "No, Dad, I'm going to graduate." "Damn right you are. You're the best pilot I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. Not because you're my daughter, because it's true." "Thanks, Dad." "Don't thank me, just go out there and show them what a Keller can do." And Raven, "Yeah. Remember why you started flying. Not for the recognition, not to prove anything to anyone. You fly because it's in your blood. Because when you're in the air, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Keep that and the rest will follow." After they hung up, Raven sat in silence. Her father's words settled something inside her. He was right. The politics, the pressure, the constant evaluation, none of it mattered when she was in the cockpit. That was the only space where she was truly free. Her final weeks in Afghanistan passed quickly. More missions, more targets, more hours building the experience that would serve her at Nellie's. She flew interdiction strikes, provided overwatch for ground patrols, and twice more supported special operations. Each mission added to her reputation. Fury 11 became a call sign that ground commanders requested by name. On her last day in country, the squadron threw a going-away gathering. Colonel Marks presented her with a plaque commemorating her deployment. Captain Keller flew 87 combat missions in 6 months, 0 friendly fire incidents, 0 collateral damage complaints, and a 98% target success rate. She saved lives, destroyed enemies, and represented this squadron with distinction. We're proud to have had her, and will watch her career with great interest." The squadron applauded. Raven accepted the plaque, offered brief thanks, and extracted herself from the attention as quickly as politeness allowed. Lieutenant Park caught up with her outside. "You're terrible at accepting praise, you know that. I'm better at earning it." "Fair point. Listen, before you go to Nellie's, I want to say something." Park hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "You've changed how people see female pilots. Not by talking about it, not by making it political, just by being undeniably good at your job. That matters more than you probably realize." Raven shook her head. "I didn't change anything. The same people who doubted before still doubt. The same people who support women in combat still support. I just flew missions. You flew missions better than almost anyone, that's the change. You made it impossible to dismiss us as diversity hires or PR moves. You proved we belong. We always belonged, Raven said quietly. We just needed the chance to show it. The flight back to the States was long. Raven spent most of it sleeping, her body finally releasing the tension of 6 months in a combat zone. When she landed at Nellie's 2 weeks later, the reality of what came next settled over her. The base sprawled across the Nevada desert, home to the Air Force's most advanced training programs. Somewhere on this base, instructors were preparing lessons designed to push her to her absolute limit. She checked into her temporary quarters, unpacked her gear, and walked the flight line. A-10 sat in neat rows, gray and menacing in the desert sun. These weren't the weathered combat birds from Afghanistan. These were pristine, configured specifically for the weapons school training mission. Tomorrow she'd meet her instructors and fellow students. Tomorrow the real test began. That evening she sat outside her quarters watching the sun set over the desert. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it. Captain Keller, heard you're attending weapons school, looking forward to seeing what you can do. The standard is the standard, expect no quarter but also no prejudice. Bring your A game. LT Call Vance. She looked up the name. Lieutenant Colonel David Vance, Chief Instructor for A-10 Weapons School. 25 years in the Air Force, 3 combat deployments, graduate of both Weapons School and the Navy's TOPGUN program. His reputation preceded him. Brilliant tactician, merciless evaluator, absolutely uncompromising on standards. The message was clear. She'd get no special treatment, positive or negative, just the mission, the standards, and the results. Exactly what she wanted. Raven typed back a simple reply, understood, sir, ready to learn. She hit send, pocketed the phone, and watched the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow would come soon enough. In the darkness, the warthogs on the flight line looked like sleeping predators. Waiting. She was ready to wake them up. The first day of weapons school began at 500 hours with a briefing that lasted 3 hours. 18 students sat in the classroom, all experienced pilots, all hand-picked from their squadrons. Raven was the only woman. She'd expected that. What she hadn't expected was the level of scrutiny from the first moment. Eyes tracked her as she entered, sizing her up. Some looks were curious, others skeptical, a few openly dismissive. Lieutenant Colonel Vance entered and the room snapped to attention. Seats, he barked. Everyone sat. Vance was shorter than Raven expected, maybe 5'9", with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He paced the front of the room like a caged animal. You are here because someone believes you have the potential to be weapons officers. That makes you lucky, not special. 10% of you will wash out. Another 20% will graduate but never really get it. The rest will become the tactical experts this Air Force needs. Your job is to figure out which group you're in. He pulled up a slide showing a complex tactical scenario. This is not flight school. This is not basic combat training. This is graduate-level warfare. You will be expected to plan, brief, execute, and debrief complex missions while under evaluation. You will be critiqued on everything: tactics, communication, flight discipline, mission planning, leadership. There are no participation trophies. You earn your patch or you go home. His eyes swept the room and landed on Raven. Some of you are here with reputations. Combat deployments, commendations, stories that have grown in the telling. That means nothing here. I don't care what you did downrange. I care what you can do when I'm grading you. Clear, clear, sir, the room chorused. The day proceeded with academics. Threat systems, electronic warfare, weapons employment, mission planning tools. Raven absorbed it all, taking notes, asking questions when appropriate. By 1800 hours, her brain felt saturated. But the day wasn't over. First flight is tomorrow, 800 brief, Vance announced. 4-ship surface attack on a simulated target array. You'll be flying against our Red Air aggressors and a realistic IADS integrated air defense system. Your mission is to get in, service targets get out. Simple on paper. We'll see how you do. He pulled up a list. Team leads for tomorrow: Captain Hendricks, Captain Keller, Captain Rodriguez, Captain Stone. Everyone else will fly as wingmen and rotate into lead positions as we progress. Team leads, you have 12 hours to plan. I expect professional briefings. Dismissed. The room emptied. Raven gathered her materials and found herself walking to the mission planning room with the other 3 team leads. Captain Marcus Stone, an A-10 pilot from Moody AFB, fell in beside her. "Heard about you," he said conversationally. "November 7-4, that true? Which part? Any of it?" The stories get pretty wild. I flew a close air support mission in confined terrain. Did my job, that's all. Stone studied her. If you did half what they say, that's impressive. But Keller, this isn't Afghanistan. Vance doesn't care about combat cred. He cares about perfect tactics executed perfectly. Real world is messy. This place demands precision. Good thing I'm precise, Raven replied evenly. Stone smiled slightly. We'll see. Good luck tomorrow. The mission planning took until 200 hours. Raven built her attack plan methodically: ingress route, target assignments, communication protocols, abort criteria. She studied the threat systems, planned countermeasures, identified weaknesses in the simulated IADS. By the time she finished, her eyes burned with fatigue. She grabbed 3 hours of sleep, woke to her alarm, and headed to the brief. Her team consisted of 3 other pilots she'd barely met. They looked at her expectantly, waiting for her to lead. This was the moment. Not combat, but something arguably harder, proving herself in front of peers and instructors. Raven briefed her plan, 30 minutes covering every phase of the mission. She spoke clearly, answered questions, adjusted based on input from her team. When she finished, she looked at their faces, trying to read their assessment. Captain Andrea Flores, her number 2, nodded. "Solid plan, conservative ingress, aggressive on target, clean egress. I like it." The others agreed. First hurdle cleared. They stepped to the jets at 7:45 hours. Raven went through her pre-flight with practiced efficiency, checking systems, loading mission data, familiarizing herself with this specific aircraft. Every Warthog was slightly different, small quirks and characteristics. Good pilots learned their jet. At 800 they taxied. 4 A-10s in loose formation, moving to the arming area for final weapons checks. Raven ran through her checklist: comm check with her flight, coordination with range control, everything nominal. Then they were airborne, climbing into the bright Nevada morning. The range complex sprawled below, hundreds of square miles of restricted airspace where the Air Force played its war games. Raven could see the target array ahead, a simulated enemy position with dummy vehicles, buildings, and most importantly, threat emitters. The IADS was active. On her threat display, symbols appeared. SA-6 surface-to-air missiles, ZSU-23 anti-aircraft artillery, MANPADs in close proximity to targets. All simulated, all designed to kill them if they made mistakes. Fury Flight, Fury 1, picture is as briefed. Threat systems active, execute on my mark. She gave her wingmen final checks, confirmed they were ready, then began the attack run. The plan unfolded exactly as briefed, for about 90 seconds. Then the scenario changed. The instructors, monitoring from a control room, activated additional threats she hadn't planned for. Mobile SA-15 systems, positioned where intelligence hadn't predicted. Suddenly, her ingress route was compromised. Raven saw the problem immediately. Her planned approach would put her flight directly into engagement zones. She had seconds to decide: abort and replan or adapt on the fly. Fury Flight, Fury 1, new threat picture. SA-15s at grid November 4-2, shifting to alternate ingress. Flow south, single ship spacing, terrain masking. Copy. Her wingmen acknowledged. Raven banked hard, dropping below the simulated ridgeline, using terrain to break the SAM radar lock. Her mind raced, recalculating approach vectors, target assignments, egress routes. This was what Vance was testing, not the memorized plan but adaptability under pressure. She led her flight through a canyon, popped up at the last second, and rolled in on her assigned target. The simulated cannon fired, her HUD showing hits. Target serviced. Break right, back into terrain masking, let the next aircraft flow through. Her wingmen followed, each executing their attacks, adapting to the changing threat picture. In 5 minutes it was over. All targets engaged, all aircraft simulated as surviving. They egressed to the south, formed up, and headed back to Nellie's. The debrief was brutal. Lieutenant Colonel Vance tore apart every phase of the mission. Target spacing was inefficient. Radio communication was cluttered. One of her wingmen had flown through another's flight path. Her own break after target attack had been too predictable. "Captain Keller," Vance said, pulling up her gun camera footage. "You adapted to the new threat. Good, but your initial plan should have accounted for mobile SAMs. They're standard doctrine for any modern IADS. Why didn't you plan for them?" Raven kept her voice level. "Sir, the intelligence briefing didn't indicate mobile assets in that sector. Intelligence is always incomplete. That's why it's called the fog of war. You need to plan for what you don't know, not just what you do." "Understood, sir." Vance moved on, dissecting every decision, every communication, every tactical choice. By the end, Raven felt like she'd been through a shredder, but underneath the criticism, she recognized something valuable. Vance was teaching, not just evaluating. Every point he made was designed to improve their tactical thinking. He wasn't attacking her personally. He was forging her into something better. The pattern repeated for weeks. Mission, brief, fly, debrief. Each sortie more complex, each scenario designed to expose weaknesses. Raven threw herself into it, studying late into the night, memorizing threat systems, refining tactics. Some students struggled. 2 washed out in the first month. 1 failed to adapt to the academic rigor. Another couldn't handle the stress of constant evaluation. The class that remained grew tighter, bonded by shared suffering and mutual respect. Captain Stone became an unexpected ally. After a particularly brutal debrief where Vance had destroyed one of Raven's mission plans, Stone found her in the planning room. "Don't take it personally," he said. "Vance does this to everyone. He finds your weakness and hammers it until you fix it or break." "I'm not breaking," Raven said quietly. "I know that's obvious, but Keller, you're carrying extra weight. Everyone sees it. You're not just proving yourself. You're proving all female pilots can do this. That's not fair, but it's real." Raven looked at him. "I don't need a pep talk, Stone." "Not offering one, I'm offering perspective. You're one of the strongest tacticians in this class. Your mission planning is exceptional, but you're holding back in the air, flying conservative like you're afraid to make mistakes. That caution is going to get you killed in real combat. I flew 87 combat missions. I know what real combat looks like." "Then fly like it. Vance isn't grading you on playing it safe. He's grading you on winning. Sometimes winning requires risk." Stone left her with that thought. That night, Raven reviewed her gun camera footage from the last month. He was right. She was flying technically correct but uninspired. Safe. In Afghanistan, she'd pushed the envelope, taken calculated risks, done what was necessary. Here, under scrutiny, she'd reverted to caution. The next mission was close air support, simulating troops in contact. Raven briefed her plan, but this time she built in aggressive options. Minimum safe distances, multiple attack vectors, creative use of terrain. When they flew the mission, she attacked like she had over November 7-4. Low, fast, decisive. The debrief was different. Vance studied her footage in silence, then nodded. "That's what I've been waiting for, Captain. You finally showed up." From that point, something shifted. Raven stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to win. Her mission planning became bolder, her flying more dynamic. She took risks when they were justified, played it safe when they weren't. Most importantly, she started trusting her instincts again. The class noticed. Captain Flores approached her after a successful 8-ship mission. "You're a different pilot than when we started. Whoever you were trying to be, you stopped. Now you're just you. It's working." By month 4, Raven was consistently at the top of the class rankings. Her missions were used as examples. Her tactical innovations were incorporated into instruction. Even Vance, never generous with praise, acknowledged her progress. "Captain Keller, you've developed into exactly what a weapons officer should be. Tactically proficient, adaptable, and aggressive when required. Keep this up." But the final test was still ahead. The capstone mission, a complex, multi-phase operation that would test everything they'd learned. 8 aircraft, multiple target sets, realistic threats, limited communications. Plan it, brief it, fly it, and be graded on every decision. Raven was selected as overall mission commander. the highest pressure position, responsible not just for her own flight but for coordinating the entire strike package. She had 1 week to plan. The mission brief from Vance was intentionally vague. High-value target complex, heavily defended, dynamic threats. Mission success requires complete destruction of all assigned targets with zero fratricide. You have all available resources. Make it work. Raven assembled her team and began planning. 8 aircraft divided into 2 4 ships. She'd lead Alpha Flight, Captain Stone would lead Bravo. They'd strike simultaneously from different vectors, overwhelming the defenses. Target assignments were based on weapons load and approach angle. Timing had to be precise. Too early and Alpha would face the full weight of defenses. Too late and the element of surprise was lost. She war-gamed every scenario she could imagine. Enemy reinforcements, communications failure, aircraft malfunction. For each problem, she built a contingency. By the end of the week, the brief document was 40 pages, dense, detailed, professional. The brief itself took 2 hours. Raven walked through every phase, every decision point, every contingency. She fielded questions from her team, adjusted based on input, refined until everyone understood their role. Lieutenant Colonel Vance sat in the back, taking notes, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he stood. Questions for Captain Keller. One of the junior students raised a hand. "Ma'am, your ingress has us at 200 feet through hostile territory for 6 minutes. That's a long time in the threat envelope." Raven nodded. "It is, but terrain masking degrades their radar effectiveness by 70%. The threat isn't zero, but it's manageable, and it puts us in position for immediate target attack. Altitude means safety, but also compromise. At 200 feet, we're committed, but we're also lethal." The student nodded, satisfied. No more questions. Vance approached the front. "Bold plan, Captain. Success requires perfect execution and some luck, but that's combat. We brief in 2 days. Use the time to refine." Dismissed. The flight happened on a Tuesday morning, clear skies, light winds, perfect conditions. Raven's heart rate was elevated as she strapped into the cockpit, but her hands were steady. This was what she'd trained for. Not just the last 5 months at weapons school, but her entire career. 8 A-10s taxied in sequence. Raven ran through her checks, comm check with Alpha Flight, coordination with Stone's Bravo Flight. Everything green. They launched on schedule. The strike package formed up over the range, then split. Bravo Flight headed west, Alpha Flight south. In 15 minutes, they'd converge on target from opposite directions. Raven led her flight low, hugging the terrain, eyes scanning for threats. Her threat display was lit up like a Christmas tree. SA-6, SA-15, ZSU-23, MA and PADs. All the threats she'd planned for, positioned exactly where intelligence predicted. So far, so good. Alpha Flight Fury 1, 2 minutes to IP. Final checks. Her wingman confirmed. Weapons armed, systems nominal, ready to engage. At the initial point, Raven pulled up to 500 feet, just high enough to acquire targets. The compound appeared ahead, simulated buildings, vehicles, threat emitters. Her HUD displayed target assignments. Her heart rate settled. This was just flying, just tactics, just executing the plan. Alpha Flight Fury 1 commencing attack run, execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1 mark. She rolled in, diving toward her target. The simulated cannon fired, HUD showing hits. Brake left, terrain masking, clear the area for her wingmen. She heard their calls as they rolled in. Fury 2 in hot. Fury 3 tally target. Fury 4 engaged. Professional, crisp, exactly as briefed. In 90 seconds, Alpha Flight's targets were destroyed. Stone's Bravo Flight hit from the west simultaneously. 8 aircraft, perfect coordination, overwhelming firepower. The simulated defenses never had a chance. Egress was clean. All aircraft formed up and headed home. In the cockpit, Raven allowed herself a small smile. They'd done it. The final debrief was held in the main auditorium. All the instructors attended, along with visiting senior officers. This was the culmination of 6 months of work. Raven stood at the front, briefing the mission results. Flawless execution, all targets destroyed, 0 simulated losses. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Lieutenant Colonel Vance stood. "Captain Keller's mission represents the standard we expect from weapons officers. Tactically sound, professionally executed, well led. This is what graduate-level warfare looks like. He paused, then smiled slightly. Well done, the room applauded. Raven felt the weight lift slightly. She'd done it, proven herself in the arena that mattered most. A week later, the graduation ceremony was held. 18 pilots had started, 14 graduated. Raven stood with her class as the commandant pinned weapons officer patches on their shoulders. The patch was simple, a red lightning bolt, but it carried weight. It meant expertise, respect, authority. After the ceremony, her father called. Saw the photos. Proud of you, sweetheart. Thanks, Dad. You know what this means, right? You're not just a pilot anymore. You're an expert. People will look to you for answers. That's a different kind of responsibility. I know, but you're ready. You've always been ready. Now go show them what you can do. Raven hung up and looked at the patch on her shoulder. Her father was right. This was a new beginning, but it was also the start of a different kind of scrutiny. She was no longer just Captain Keller, pilot. She was Captain Keller, weapons officer, the expert who couldn't afford to be wrong. Her first assignment after weapons school was back to operational flying, but now as a weapons officer in the squadron. Her job was to advise the commander on tactics, train pilots, and serve as subject matter expert for complex missions. It was rewarding work, but it came with the same old challenges. Some pilots sought her expertise eagerly. Others resented taking advice from a woman, even one with her credentials. During a mission brief 3 months after returning, a senior captain challenged her recommendation. With respect, Keller, your approach is too aggressive. We don't need to press that close. Raven kept her tone professional. Sir, the target is time-sensitive and heavily defended. Standoff weapons won't penetrate their bunker. The gun is the only viable option, which requires close proximity. Or, the captain replied, we use precision munitions and stay out of small arms range. Safer, still effective. Safer, yes, effective maybe. The intelligence assessment gives bunker walls at 3 meters reinforced concrete. GBU-12s won't penetrate. The 30mm can if we hit the right spot. That's not aggression, that's mission requirements. The room watched the exchange. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reed, intervened. Captain Keller is our weapons officer. Her assessment carries weight. Unless you have tactical evidence to counter her recommendation, we're going with her plan. The senior captain backed down, but the resentment was clear. After the brief, Reed pulled Raven aside. You're going to face that constantly. People who can't see past gender, who think your patch was a diversity quota, who need to test you every single time. I know, sir. The only answer is to be right, not sometimes. Every time. It's not fair, but it's reality. Raven nodded. She'd been living that reality her entire career. Being right every time was exhausting, but it was the price of credibility. The mission went as she'd planned. Precision gunfire, targets destroyed, aircraft returned safely. Validation, but temporary. The next mission would require proving herself again. 2 years passed in this cycle. Raven flew, trained, advised. Her reputation continued to grow. She was promoted to major, given more responsibility, tasked with writing tactical doctrine for A-10 close air support employment. But the personal cost was accumulating. Relationships were difficult to maintain. She dated a few times, but the military lifestyle and her dedication to flying left little room for balance. Most men were intimidated by her competence or resentful of her success. She was approaching 34, still young by most standards, but in a career that prized youth and physical stamina, she felt the clock ticking. One evening, sitting alone in her quarters, she received an unexpected email. The sender was a major general she didn't know personally, but whose reputation was legendary. Major General Patricia Reeves, one of the highest-ranking female officers in the Air Force. The email was brief. Major Keller, I've been following your career with interest. I'd like to meet. Are you available for a call? Raven stared at the screen. Reeves was a mentor to female officers across the service, a fighter pilot who'd broken barriers in the 90s when women weren't even allowed in combat roles officially. If she was reaching out, it meant something. Raven replied immediately, yes, ma'am, available at your convenience. The call came 2 days later. Reeves got straight to the point. Major Keller, I'm not going to waste your time with pleasantries. I've reviewed your record. Combat deployments, weapons, school, graduate, tactical innovations that are being taught service-wide. You're exactly the kind of officer we need in senior leadership. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. I'm calling because you're at a crossroads. You can continue flying, continue being tactically excellent, and retire as a lieutenant colonel, respectable career, or you can start transitioning toward command. Raven was silent, processing. Reeves continued. Command means less flying, more administration, more politics. It means evaluations that have nothing to do with your skills in the cockpit and everything to do with your ability to lead people, manage budgets, and navigate bureaucracy. It's frustrating work, but it's also how you change the institution. Flying missions saves lives in the moment. Commanding squadrons, shaping policy, that saves lives for decades. Ma'am, with respect, I became a pilot to fly, not to push paper. I understand, I felt the same way. But Major Keller, if people like us don't move into command positions, the institution stays the same. The barriers remain, the biases persist. You have a chance to change that, to make it easier for the next generation of female aviators. That's worth considering. After the call ended, Raven sat in silence. Reeves was offering a path she'd never seriously considered. Squadron command, wing command, potentially higher. But it meant giving up the one thing that had defined her, the cockpit. Could she do that? Should she? Her phone buzzed. A text from Lieutenant Park, now a captain herself, stationed at Fort Campbell. Heard a rumor you're being considered for squadron command. Please tell me it's true. We need you in leadership. Word traveled fast. Raven hadn't decided anything, but apparently the Air Force was already planning. She spent the next week wrestling with the decision. Fly or lead. Stay in the cockpit where she was comfortable, where she had control, where success was measurable. Or step into command where success was ambiguous, where she'd be judged on metrics she couldn't directly control. The decision was made for her in a way when Colonel Reed called her into his office. Major Keller, I just received notification. You've been selected for squadron command. 74th Fighter Squadron at Moody Air Force Base. Raven felt her stomach drop. Sir, I haven't submitted my preference for command positions. Reed nodded. I know, they selected you anyway. Your record speaks for itself. The Air Force needs proven leaders, especially in combat units. And frankly, they need visible female commanders. You check both boxes. This feels like a diversity push, sir. Maybe it is, but it's also recognition of competence. You've earned this, Keller. The fact that you're also female is a bonus for the institution, but it's not why you were selected. Don't diminish your own accomplishments. Raven took a breath. When do they want me to start? You have 6 months. Finish up here, attend Squadron Officers School, then take command. It's a good opportunity. Don't overthink it. She left his office feeling unmoored. Command, leadership, a fundamentally different role than she'd prepared for. That night she called her father again. Dad, they're giving me a squadron. That's wonderful, isn't it? She smiled despite herself. I don't know, it means less flying, more meetings, more paperwork, more politics. Raven, you've been preparing for leadership your entire life. You just didn't realize it. Every time you brought a crew home safe, every time you trained a new pilot, every time you made a tactical decision that saved lives, that was leadership. This is just a different application. But what if I'm not good at it? For the first time, she voiced the fear. What if I'm only good in the cockpit? Her father was quiet for a moment. You know what your mother used to say? She said the worst thing you can do is make yourself smaller to fit someone else's expectations. You're taking a squadron because someone believes you can lead. Trust that judgment, and trust yourself. The call ended. Raven sat with his words. She'd spent so long proving she could fly that she'd never considered whether she could lead. Squadron Officers School was intense but manageable. Leadership theory, management principles, strategic planning. Raven absorbed it like she absorbed everything, methodically, completely. But the most valuable lessons came from the other students. Officers from different backgrounds, different airframes, different perspectives. One discussion stuck with her. The instructor posed a scenario. A pilot under your command makes a serious error that doesn't result in injury but could have. Do you ground them, retrain them, or tolerate it as part of learning? The class debated. Some argued for immediate grounding, safety first. Others said retraining. Raven offered a different perspective. It depends on the pilot. If it's a pattern, ground them. If it's an anomaly from an otherwise competent aviator, retrain. But if it's a young pilot still learning, sometimes the error itself is the training. You debrief, they learn from the mistake, they become better. The key is knowing your people well enough to make that judgment. The instructor nodded. Leadership isn't one size fits all. It's knowing when to be strict, when to be flexible, and having the wisdom to tell the difference. Major Keller understands that. After class, another student approached her, Major Tom Hendricks, an F-15 pilot. You have actual command experience. No, but I've led missions, trained pilots. It's not the same, but it's preparation. You seem confident. That's good. Command is like flying. If you hesitate, you crash. She appreciated the insight. Hendricks wasn't wrong. 6 months later, she stood in front of the 74th Fighter Squadron at Moody Air Force Base, taking command from the outgoing commander. The ceremony was formal, traditional. Speeches, guidon passing, applause. But afterward, in the privacy of her new office, reality set in. She was responsible for 90 personnel, 20 A-10 aircraft, mission readiness for an entire squadron. The weight was different than cockpit responsibility, heavier in some ways. Her first week was orientation, meeting pilots, ground crews, support staff, learning names, faces, capabilities. She made a point to spend time in the maintenance bays, talking to the crew chiefs and specialists who kept the aircraft flying. "Ma'am, with respect, most commanders don't bother learning our names," one staff sergeant said. "Then most commanders are making a mistake," Raven replied. "You keep these birds in the air. That makes you essential. I need to know who you are and what you do." The sergeant smiled. "Yes, ma'am, welcome to the squadron." But not everyone was welcoming. Her deputy commander, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Morrison, was professional but cold. During their first meeting, he made his position clear. "Ma'am, I've been in this squadron for 3 years. I know the people, the aircraft, the mission. If you need guidance, I'm available." The subtext was obvious. He thought he should have gotten command. Now he was working for someone with less time in grade, less experience in leadership, and a different chromosome. Raven addressed it directly. "Colonel Morrison, I appreciate your experience. I'm going to lean on you heavily, especially in the first few months, but I need to know, can you support me even if you disagree with my decisions?" Morrison met her eyes. "I follow orders, ma'am, that's never in question, but respect is earned, not given with the rank." "Fair enough. Then I'll earn it." Their relationship remained tense but functional. Morrison did his job, and Raven made sure to involve him in decision, seeking his input even when she didn't take his advice. Slowly, grudgingly, he began to see her competence. 3 months into command, the squadron received a deployment order. 4 A-10s to Iraq, supporting operations against ISIS remnants. Raven would lead the deployment. This was the test. Stateside command was one thing. Combat leadership was different. The deployment lasted 6 months. Raven led from the front, flying missions alongside her pilots, making tactical decisions in real time, managing logistics and personnel issues. The squadron performed exceptionally. 0 accidents, high operational tempo, multiple successful strikes against high-value targets. Her leadership style was direct but fair. She demanded excellence but also took care of her people. When a young lieutenant made an error in judgment that could have resulted in friendly fire, Raven grounded him temporarily, debriefed the incident thoroughly, and then put him back in the cockpit with additional training. "You made a mistake," she told him. "That's human, but you learn from it and you never make it again. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good, because you're a good pilot with a long career ahead. Don't let one mistake define you." The lieutenant went on to become one of the squadron's most reliable pilots. That story circulated. Raven was tough but believed in second chances. She built loyalty through competence and care. By the time they returned stateside, the squadron's reputation had grown. High readiness ratings, successful deployment, strong morale. Raven received a commendation and a promotion to lieutenant colonel. But more importantly, she'd proven she could lead. Not just fly, but lead. Colonel Reed, now a brigadier general, called to congratulate her. "Keller, I knew you'd be good at command, but you exceeded expectations. The feedback from your squadron is exceptional. You've built something special." "Thank you, sir. The squadron did the work. I just tried to support them." "That's exactly what a commander should do. Keep it up. You're on track for bigger things." After the call, Raven sat in her office and thought about the journey, from Nebraska crop fields to squadron command. From being underestimated to becoming undeniable, it had been exhausting, frustrating, and lonely at times, but it had been worth it. Her second year in command brought new challenges. The Air Force was considering retiring the A-10 fleet. Budget cuts, shifting priorities, the constant argument that close air support could be handled by multi-role fighters. Raven found herself fighting not just for her squadron but for the entire airframe. She testified before congressional committees, provided tactical analysis, and made the case based on capability, not sentiment. The A-10 is not obsolete, she told a room full of lawmakers. It's specialized. There is no other aircraft that can provide the same level of close air support with the same survivability and precision. Multi-role fighters are excellent at many things. The A-10 is exceptional at one thing, and that one thing saves American lives. Her testimony, combined with advocacy from ground commanders who'd been supported by A-10s, helped preserve the fleet, at least for now. The fight would continue, she knew, but it was a victory worth celebrating. During this period, she received another call from Major General Reeves, now a lieutenant general. "Colonel Keller, I'm retiring next year. Before I do, I wanted to tell you something. You've become the leader I hoped you would. Not because you followed a prescribed path, but because you stayed true to your principles while adapting to new roles. That's rare. Thank you, ma'am. Your guidance has been invaluable." One more piece of guidance then, don't stop at squadron command. This Air Force needs you at higher levels. Wing command, maybe air staff. You have the credibility and competence. Use it. Raven considered the words. Wing command meant even less flying, even more bureaucracy, but it also meant more influence, more ability to shape policy and protect the communities she cared about. "I'll think about it, ma'am. That's all I ask." Oh, and Keller. "I've been watching the next generation of female aviators. They fly differently than we did. More confident, less apologetic. You know why? Because you showed them it was possible. Never forget that." 3 years into squadron command, Raven received the call she'd been half expecting. Wing command. The 23rd Wing at Moody. Responsibility for multiple squadrons, thousands of personnel, oversight of an entire installation. It was the pinnacle of operational leadership. She accepted. The assumption of command ceremony was larger, more formal. Senior officers attended, including a 3-star general. When Raven took the guidon, she felt the full weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about flying anymore. It was about institutional leadership. Her first address to the wing was carefully prepared. "I became a pilot because I love flying. I still do. But I've learned that leadership is about more than personal excellence. It's about creating conditions for everyone to excel. My job is to remove obstacles, provide resources, and set standards. Your job is to execute the mission. Together, we'll make this wing the most capable in the Air Force." She meant every word. Over the next 2 years, she transformed the wing's culture. Emphasis on realistic training, investment in people, ruthless focus on readiness. The results spoke for themselves. Higher retention, better performance metrics, increased operational capability. But the most significant moment came during a visit from the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. 4-star general, the highest-ranking officer in the service. He toured the installation, met with airmen, observed training. At the end, he met privately with Raven. "Colonel Keller, I've seen a lot of wings. Yours is exceptional. Morale is high, capability is outstanding, and your people clearly respect you. That's not common." "Thank you, sir. I have exceptional people to work with." "You also have exceptional leadership. I'm adding you to the list of candidates for Brigadier General, 1 star. You'd be one of the youngest female generals in the Air Force and one of very few with extensive combat experience." Interested? Raven felt her breath catch. General officer. It was a rank she'd never imagined achieving. "Sir, I'm honored, but I need to ask, is this selection based on merit or diversity?" The general smiled slightly. "Direct question. Fair. Here's the answer. You wouldn't be considered if you weren't qualified. Your record speaks for itself. But yes, the fact that you're female is a factor. The Air Force needs diverse leadership at senior levels. Not for appearances, but because diverse perspectives make better decisions. You bring both competence and perspective. That's why you're being considered." "Then yes, sir, I'm interested." 6 months later, the promotion came through. Brigadier General Raven Keller, 1 star. The ceremony was held at the Pentagon, attended by her father, now in his 70s but still sharp. He pinned the star on her shoulder with shaking hands, tears in his eyes. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered. Raven hugged him, allowing herself a moment of emotion. "I wouldn't be here without you, Dad." "Yes, you would. I just helped you get here faster." As a general officer, Raven's responsibilities shifted again. Now she was involved in strategic planning, policy development, resource allocation. She sat in meetings where decisions affected thousands of airmen and shaped the future of the Air Force. It was important work, but she missed the cockpit. Late one evening, alone in her office at the Pentagon, she pulled up old gun camera footage from her deployment years ago. The mission over November 7-4. She watched herself roll in on that ridgeline, gun blazing, pulling off target. So many years ago. So much had changed. But the core remained. She was still that pilot from Nebraska who believed in precision, who refused to leave anyone behind, who made the hard call when needed. Just in a different uniform now, with different responsibilities. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A young captain stood there, female, pilot wings on her chest. "Ma'am, sorry to disturb. I'm Captain Lisa Monroe. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm transitioning to A-10s next month." Raven smiled. "Come in, Captain. What can I do for you?" Monroe entered nervously. "Ma'am, I know this is probably inappropriate, but you're the reason I became a pilot. I heard about November 7-4, about your career, about how you never let anyone say you didn't belong. That inspired me. I wanted to thank you." Raven felt something shift inside her. This was the legacy General Reeves had mentioned. Not the missions flown or the commands held, but the doors opened for others. "Captain Monroe, you don't need to thank me. You earned your wings. You belong in that cockpit because you're qualified, not because I flew before you." "I know, ma'am, but it's easier to believe you belong when someone who looks like you has already proven it's possible. That's what you gave us, proof." After Monroe left, Raven sat in silence. The journey from that first flight in her father's Cessna to this office in the Pentagon felt impossible. But it had happened, one decision at a time, one mission at a time, one moment of refusing to quit at a time. She thought about the young pilots coming up behind her, women who would fly combat missions without the same barriers she'd faced, who would command squadrons and wings and maybe even major commands. They would have struggles, certainly. Bias didn't disappear overnight. But the path was clearer now, wider. She'd helped build that path stone by stone, mission by mission. 5 years later, Raven retired as a major general. 2 stars, 30 years of service, a career that defied the limitations others had tried to impose. At her retirement ceremony, the chief of staff gave the address. Major General Keller's career is a testament to competence, courage, and perseverance. She's been a pioneer, a warrior, and a leader. But perhaps her greatest contribution is simply this: she proved it could be done. The reception after the ceremony was crowded. Pilots she'd flown with, commanders she'd served under, young officers whose careers she'd mentored. Her father was there, frail now but beaming with pride. And standing in the corner in civilian clothes was Commander Victor Harland, retired now but he'd flown in for the ceremony. Raven made her way over. "Commander Harland, I didn't know you were coming." "Wouldn't miss it, ma'am. You saved my life once." "Least I can do is show up when you hang up the flight suit." They talked for a while about old times, old missions. Then Harlan said something that stuck with her. "You know, that day in November 7-4, I thought we were done. I'd made peace with it. Then I heard your aircraft coming over that ridge and I knew we had a chance. Not because of the A-10, but because of who was flying it. You were the difference, General. Never doubt that." After the reception, Raven drove to a small airfield outside Washington. She'd arranged to rent a Cessna, a model similar to her father's old plane. The owner handed her the keys with a smile. "She's all fueled up, General. Take your time." Raven pre-flighted the aircraft, climbed in, and started the engine. The familiar sound, the vibration through the yoke, the smell of avgas, it all came flooding back. She taxied to the runway, received clearance, and advanced the throttle. The little Cessna accelerated, and at 55 knots she pulled back on the yoke. The Aircraft lifted off smoothly, climbing into the afternoon sky. No weapon systems, no tactical scenarios, no life-and-death decisions, just flying. She climbed to 4,000 feet and leveled off, pointing north toward no particular destination. Below, the Virginia countryside spread out in patches of green and brown. She thought about her mother, gone too soon. Her father, who'd given her wings. The pilots she'd flown with, the lives she'd saved, the barriers she'd broken. It had been an impossible journey. But she'd made it possible. In the distance, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Raven banked the Cessna west toward the light and flew on. Behind her, a legacy of competence, courage, and quiet determination. Ahead, nothing but clear sky and the horizon. She'd earned this peace. She'd earned the right to just fly without proving anything to anyone. The radio crackled, air traffic control checking in. Cessna November 37 Bravo, radar contact. Altitude and heading look good. Anything you need. Raven keyed the mic, smiled, and replied with words that felt like coming home. Negative, just flying, weather's perfect, life's good. And for the first time in 30 years, it was that simple. No call signs, no missions, no expectations. Just a pilot and an aircraft in the sky. Exactly where she was always meant to be. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the earth. Raven flew until the light faded, then turned back toward the airfield. The landing was smooth, practiced, the result of 10,000 hours in the air. After shutdown, she sat in the cockpit for a moment longer, hands on the yoke, feeling the stillness. This was the gift. Not the rank, not the medals, not the recognition. The gift was knowing she'd done it right, stayed true to her principles, never compromised her integrity, and proved that excellence had no gender. She climbed out, locked the aircraft, and walked to her car. Tomorrow she'd start the next chapter, civilian life, consulting, maybe teaching. But tonight she was just a pilot who'd had a good flight, and that was enough. The airfield lights flickered on as darkness settled. Somewhere above, an A-10 flew a training mission, its distinctive engine howl carrying across the evening air. Raven paused, listening. The sound was bittersweet, a reminder of what she'd left behind, but also what she'd built. That pilot up there, flying confidently through the darkening sky, was flying in a world Raven had helped create. A world where competence mattered more than gender, where the only question was, can you do the job? Not, should you be allowed to try? The engine sound faded into the distance. Raven got in her car and drove home, the Pentagon receding in her rearview mirror. Her career was over, but her impact would ripple forward through generations of pilots she'd never meet. They would face their own battles, their own moments of doubt, their own valleys of fire. But they would also have proof that those challenges could be overcome. They would have her example. Not perfect, not without mistakes, but undeniably capable. That night she lay in bed thinking about one particular memory. The moment over November 7-4 when she'd committed to the gun run, knowing the risks, trusting her training, refusing to leave Harlan's team behind. That decision had defined everything that followed. Not because it was reckless or heroic, but because it was necessary. Someone needed help. She had the capability. The choice was obvious. Every significant moment in her career had followed that same logic. When others hesitated, she acted. When others played politics, she focused on the mission. When others made excuses, she found solutions. It wasn't complicated. It was just being a pilot, being a warrior, being someone who understood that rank and recognition were secondary to doing the job right. In the darkness, she smiled. They'd called her fury for the ferocity she brought to combat. But the real fury had been quieter, the steady, relentless determination to prove that she belonged, mission after mission, year after year, until even the doubters had to acknowledge the truth. She'd won that battle, not through anger or confrontation, but through excellence so consistent it became undeniable. That was the lesson. That was what she'd leave behind. Not a story of overcoming adversity, though she had. Not a narrative of breaking barriers, though she'd done that too. The lesson was simpler. Be so good they can't ignore you. Do the job so well that arguments become irrelevant. Let the work speak. She fell asleep thinking about the young pilots who would follow, Captain Monroe and countless others. They would fly faster jets, face different threats, operate in wars she couldn't imagine. but they would carry forward the knowledge that gender was irrelevant in the cockpit. Only competence mattered, only the mission, only bringing everyone home. That was her legacy, not the rank she'd achieved or the medals she'd earned, but the path she'd cleared for others. A path that said, "You belong here if you can do the work." Nothing more, nothing less. In the morning her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. She answered. General Keller, a young voice, female, nervous. "Ma'am, this is Second Lieutenant Amy Reeves. I'm Patricia Reeves' granddaughter. She told me to call you when I got my pilot slot. I just found out I'm going to A-10s. Raven felt warmth spread through her chest. General Reeves' granddaughter, the next generation. Congratulations, Lieutenant. A-10s are a good choice. Challenging aircraft, important mission. Ma'am, I wanted to ask. My grandmother said you'd understand what it's like. Being a woman in this field, I'm excited but also scared. What advice would you give? Raven thought carefully. This answer mattered. Lieutenant Reeves, here's what I learned. People will doubt you, some because of bias, others because they don't know you yet. Don't waste energy arguing with them. Just fly. Be so competent, so professional, so reliable that doubt becomes impossible. And when you face the hard moments, and you will, remember why you started. Remember that you love flying more than you fear judgment. That's the fuel that gets you through. Thank you, ma'am, that helps. One more thing, Lieutenant. When you get to your squadron, find the younger pilots, the ones who need mentorship. Help them the way others helped you. That's how we build something lasting. After the call ended, Raven looked out her window at the morning sky. Clear, blue, infinite. She'd never fly an A-10 again. Never feel the gun shake the airframe. Never hear Fury 11 over the radio. But the mission continued through others. That was enough. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Raven settled into civilian life, consulting for defense contractors, teaching occasional seminars on close air support tactics. It was satisfying work, using her expertise to improve systems and training. She stayed connected to the community, attended air shows, spoke at academies, served on advisory boards, and she watched the next generation fly. Captain Monroe distinguished herself in combat, earning recognition for precision strikes in complex environments. Lieutenant Reeves graduated at the top of her training class. Dozens of other female pilots flew missions around the world, each carrying forward the proof that competence had no gender. One afternoon, Raven received an invitation to speak at the Air Force Academy. The topic, Leadership and Legacy in Combat Aviation. She accepted. The auditorium was packed with cadets, young faces full of ambition and uncertainty. Raven took the stage and looked out at them. Some were female, more than when she'd been their age, progress tangible and real. She spoke for 45 minutes, telling stories from her career. Not the dramatic moments, those were already well known, but the quieter lessons. The importance of technical mastery, the value of humility in learning, the necessity of moral courage when facing institutional resistance. When she finished, a cadet raised her hand during Q&A. Ma'am, you're considered a pioneer for women in combat aviation. Do you think about your career in those terms? Raven considered the question. Honestly, no. I think about my career in terms of missions flown, targets serviced, people brought home safely. The fact that I'm a woman is relevant to how others perceived me, but it was never relevant to my ability to do the job. I hope that's the world you inherit, one where your gender is as irrelevant as your hair color, where the only question is, can you fly? Not should you be allowed to, the auditorium applauded. But one cadet, male, raised his hand with a different question. Ma'am, some people argue that physical standards have been lowered to accommodate women in combat roles. How do you respond? Raven's expression didn't change, but her voice carried steel. I respond by pointing to my record. 87 combat missions, 0 incidents, countless lives saved. Either the standards weren't lowered or I exceeded even the inflated ones. Which do you think is more likely? The cadet looked uncomfortable. I didn't mean. I know what you meant. And here's the truth. Standards should never be lowered. The mission requirements don't care about gender. The enemy doesn't care about gender. The only thing that matters is capability. If someone, male or female, can meet the standard, they should serve. If they can't, they shouldn't. But don't assume standards were lowered just because the results challenge your assumptions. Silence in the auditorium. Then slowly applause began. It grew until the entire room was standing. Raven hadn't raised her voice, hadn't grown angry. She'd simply stated facts clearly and directly. That was the power of credibility. After the speech, several cadets approached her. They wanted advice, mentorship, connection to someone who'd walked the path they were beginning. She stayed for hours talking to each one, offering what wisdom she could. This was the work now. Not flying but teaching. Not missions but mentoring. Different but still important. As she drove away from the academy that evening, her phone rang. The number was familiar, Colonel Marcus Stone, her old classmate from weapons school. He'd made general now, serving as vice commander of an air combat command unit. Stone, it's been a while. General Keller, or should I say Dr. Keller, heard you're teaching now. Not doctor, just Raven these days. What can I do for you? Actually, I'm calling to ask for help. We're updating close air support doctrine and I want the best minds on the working group. You interested? Raven smiled. You know I am. Send me the details. Will do. And Raven, it's good to have you still in the fight, even if you're not in the cockpit anymore. The doctrinal work was fascinating. Raven spent months analyzing tactics, reviewing lessons learned from recent conflicts, and collaborating with current operators to refine approaches. Her recommendations, based on decades of experience, were incorporated into Air Force instruction, the official doctrine that would guide close air support operations for years. One section she fought for particularly hard was about risk management. The draft had language about minimizing pilot exposure, keeping aircraft at safe standoff distances. She pushed back. Risk minimization isn't the priority, she wrote in her comments. Mission accomplishment is the priority. Yes, we protect our aircraft and pilots, but not at the expense of the troops on the ground who need support. Sometimes close air support requires actual closeness. We need doctrine that acknowledges this reality. There was resistance. Some senior officers argued for more conservative language, but Raven's combat record gave her credibility that couldn't be dismissed. The final doctrine included her perspective. Close air support may require pilots to accept increased risk to provide effective support to ground forces. Commanders should enable, not restrict, tactical decision-making that prioritizes mission success while maintaining appropriate safety protocols. It was a small victory, a few sentences in a lengthy document, but those sentences would influence how thousands of pilots approached the mission. That mattered. Years passed. Raven aged gracefully into her 60s, still sharp, still engaged, but feeling the distance from her flying days grow. Her father passed away peacefully in his sleep, having lived long enough to see his daughter reach heights he'd never imagined. At the funeral, Raven delivered the eulogy. My father taught me to fly when I was 12. He taught me to love the sky, to respect the aircraft, and to never accept limitations others tried to impose. Everything I became started in that small Cessna over Nebraska fields. I owe him everything. She scattered his ashes from a rented aircraft, flying over the same fields where she'd learned. It felt appropriate. Full circle. One morning, now 68 years old, Raven received an unexpected email. The subject line read, November 7-4 Memorial. Curious, she opened it. The message was from a lieutenant colonel she didn't know, writing on behalf of Special Operations Community. They were establishing a memorial at Fort Bragg for significant close air support missions that had saved Special Operations lives. November 7-4 was being included. They wanted her to attend the dedication. Raven stared at the email. That mission had been nearly 40 years ago. 4 decades since she'd flown into that valley, uncertain if she'd come out, and they still remembered. She replied, I'd be honored to attend. The dedication ceremony was held on a clear autumn day, a stone memorial engraved with mission details and the names of the saved operators. Harlan was there, now in his 80s, still standing straight. They embraced like old friends. Fury, he said, using her call sign. Still can't believe you came that day. Still can't believe you made it out. We both made it out, Raven replied. That's what matters. During the ceremony, a current DEVGRU commander spoke. November 7-4 represents everything Special Operations values in air support: courage, precision, and absolute commitment to the ground force. Captain Keller, now retired General Keller, exemplified these values. Her actions that day set a standard we still teach. After the ceremony, young Special Operations soldiers approached her. They knew the story, had studied the mission in their training. To them, she was legend. To herself, she was just a pilot who'd done her job. That night back in her hotel room, Raven reflected on the distance between reputation and reality. The story of November 7-4 had grown over the years. Some versions had her flying at impossible altitudes, facing insurmountable odds, single-handedly winning an unwinnable fight. The truth was simpler. She'd been a competent pilot who'd made good decisions under pressure. That was all. But maybe that was enough. Maybe the legend served a purpose, inspiring others to believe they could do hard things, face impossible situations, and prevail through skill and determination. Her final years were quiet. She lived in a small house near an airfield, occasionally renting aircraft to fly for pleasure. No missions, no pressure, just the joy of being airborne. She wrote a memoir, though it took years to complete. Publishers wanted sensationalism, the drama of being a woman in a male-dominated field, the conflicts, the barriers. But Raven insisted on telling the truth. The book, titled Fury, A Pilot's Journey, focused on the flying, the tactics, the missions. Gender was addressed but not centered. It was part of her story, not the whole story. Critics praised it for its technical accuracy and emotional honesty. It became required reading at several military academies. At 72, Raven was diagnosed with cancer, aggressive but treatable. She went through chemotherapy with the same determination she'd brought to everything else. Survived, recovered, kept living. At 75, she received a call from the Secretary of the Air Force. General Keller, we're establishing a new award for excellence in close air support. We'd like to name it after you, the Keller Trophy. Would you permit this? Raven was silent for a long moment, an award bearing her name, her legacy institutionalized. Secretary, I'm honored, but I have one condition. The award should go to crews, not just pilots. Close air support is a team effort, pilots, weapons systems officers, JTACs on the ground. Everyone who makes the mission successful should be eligible. Agreed. We'll structure it that way. The first Keller Trophy was awarded the following year. A team that had provided exceptional close air support during a humanitarian disaster, saving hundreds of civilian lives. Raven attended the ceremony, now using a cane but still standing tall. When they called her to the stage to present the award, she looked at the young airmen receiving it, diverse in every way, united in competence. This was the world she'd helped build, not perfect but better. This trophy represents a commitment, she told the audience. A commitment to excellence, to the troops on the ground, and to bringing everyone home. That's the standard. That's the legacy. Live up to it. At 80, Raven's health began failing. The cancer had returned, more aggressive this time. Doctors gave her months, maybe a year. She declined aggressive treatment. She'd lived a full life, accomplished everything she'd set out to do and more. It was enough. Friends visited. Old squadron mates, former commanders, pilots she'd mentored. They shared stories, laughed about old times, and said their goodbyes. Lieutenant General Patricia Reeves' granddaughter, now a major herself, came to visit. General Keller, I wanted you to know, I made squadron command, taking over an A-10 unit next month. Raven smiled. Your grandmother would be proud, I'm proud. I wouldn't be here without you, without the path you cleared. You'd have made it anyway. Maybe it would have taken longer, been harder, but people like you, people with skill and determination, find a way. I just moved a few obstacles. One evening, as spring turned to summer, Raven sat in her backyard watching the sunset. Her breathing was labored now, her body failing, but her mind was clear. She thought about her mother, gone so many years ago, her father teaching her to fly, Commander Harland in that valley thinking it was over until he heard her engines. The thousands of missions, the countless decisions, the weight of proving herself over and over. It had been exhausting, it had been necessary, it had been worth it. As darkness fell, she heard an aircraft overhead. She looked up, trying to identify it by sound. She'd know that engine anywhere. The distinctive howl like nothing else in the sky, it passed overhead, invisible in the darkness but unmistakable in sound. She smiled. That sound was her legacy, that aircraft and the pilots who flew it. The missions they'd complete, the lives they'd save, the standards they'd uphold. Long after she was gone, that would continue. The work would go on. The mission never ended, just the individual warriors who served it. Raven Keller died peacefully in her sleep 3 weeks later. The Air Force gave her a full military funeral with honors befitting a general officer and combat veteran. Pilots from across the service attended. The eulogy was delivered by a colonel she'd mentored years ago, now a wing commander. General Keller never sought recognition. She sought excellence. She didn't demand respect. She earned it through competence that couldn't be denied. She broke barriers not by fighting them directly, but by flying so well that the barriers became irrelevant. That was her genius. That was her gift to all of us. A missing man formation flew overhead, 4 A-10s in tight formation, the third aircraft pulling up and away as they passed. The traditional salute to a fallen warrior. In the crowd, young pilots watched with tears in their eyes. They hadn't flown with her, hadn't served under her command, but they knew her legacy. They flew in the world she'd helped create. After the funeral, the Secretary of Defense announced a new policy. All combat aircraft would be named after American warriors. The first A-10 to receive this designation would be called Spirit of Keller, bearing her name into combat for generations to come. The aircraft was unveiled at Moody Air Force Base, where she'd commanded. On the nose, beneath the cockpit, her name was painted in simple letters. No flourishes, no decoration. Just the facts the way she'd always preferred. The first pilot to fly it was a young captain named Sarah Mitchell. Before takeoff, she stood by the aircraft and placed her hand on the name. "I'll do you proud, ma'am," she whispered. Then she climbed in, started engines, and taxied to the runway. The A-10 lifted off smoothly, climbing into the afternoon sky. Somewhere, Raven would have smiled. This was the legacy that mattered. Not monuments or awards, but the mission continuing, the work going on. Pilots flying, troops being supported, lives being saved. The same equation that had always defined her career. Now it would define others. Years passed. Spirit of Keller flew combat missions in conflicts Raven never knew. Different theaters, different enemies, same mission. Close air support, danger close, bringing everyone home. The aircraft took damage, was repaired, flew again. Resilient, tough, exactly like the woman it was named for. Young pilots competed for the chance to fly it. It became a mark of honor, a recognition of excellence. You didn't fly Spirit of Keller unless you'd proven yourself. That tradition spread to other aircraft. Spirit of Reeves, Spirit of Park, Spirit of Chen. Female pilots whose competence had paved the way, now immortalized in the aircraft that carried their legacy forward. Decades after Raven's death, a historian researching women in combat aviation discovered something interesting. She pulled records from November 7-4, the mission that had made Raven famous. The actual gun camera footage, the radio transmissions, the after-action reports. As she reviewed them, she was struck by how unremarkable they seemed. Professional communication, precise weapons employment, standard tactics executed well. Nothing that seemed particularly extraordinary. But then she understood. That was the point. Raven had made the extraordinary seem routine. She'd taken a mission that should have been impossible and executed it so professionally that it looked easy. That was mastery. Making the difficult look simple, the dangerous look controlled, the impossible look inevitable. The historian wrote a paper on this observation. It became influential in military studies, examining how competence at the highest levels appears effortless to observers, concealing the years of training and experience that make excellence possible. 100 years after Raven's first flight over November 7-4, the Air Force held a centennial commemoration. By then, close air support had evolved. Autonomous systems, directed energy weapons, capabilities that would have seemed like science fiction to Raven. But the mission remained. Troops on the ground still needed support. Aircraft still provided it. The technology changed. The commitment didn't. At the commemoration, the Chief of Staff unveiled a statue. Bronze, larger than life, depicting a pilot in flight gear, helmet under one arm looking toward the sky. The plaque read, Major General Raven Keller, pioneer warrior leader. She proved competence has no gender and excellence has no limits. descendants of the men Harlan's team saved at November 7 attended, grandchildren and great-grandchildren of operators who'd lived because one pilot refused to abandon them. They placed flowers at the statue's base. The ceremony concluded with a flyover. Not just A-10s, but every combat aircraft in the inventory. Fast movers, heavy bombers, rotary wing. They flew in formation over the memorial, a salute to the legacy Raven had built. Among the pilots flying that day was Lieutenant Emily Keller, Raven's great-niece. Flying an F-35, she'd never met her famous relative. Raven had died before Emily was born. But she'd grown up with the stories, the legacy, the impossible standard to live up to. As she flew over the memorial, Emily keyed her radio. "For Aunt Raven, for everyone who came before, for everyone who'll come after, we've got the watch." Simple words, but they carried weight. The watch continued. The mission endured. And somewhere, in some realm beyond human knowing, Raven would have appreciated the simplicity of that commitment. Not grand speeches or dramatic gestures. Just pilots doing the job, mission after mission, generation after generation. That was the legacy. That was what mattered. The story of Raven Keller ended with her death, but the impact of her life continued rippling forward through time. Every female pilot who served without facing the barriers she'd overcome owed her a debt. Every ground soldier supported by precise close air support benefited from tactics she'd refined. Every leader who valued competence over politics carried forward the standard she'd set. She'd been one pilot, flying one aircraft, in one small part of one service's history. But she'd proven that one person, committed to excellence and unwilling to accept limitations, could change an entire institution. The sky above November 7 remained unchanged. The mountains stood as they always had, indifferent to human struggles. But the valley had a different name now among military personnel. They called it Keller's Run, the place where a pilot had done the impossible, not through supernatural skill, but through human competence pushed to its absolute limit. Training exercises were conducted there, testing new pilots against the same challenges Raven had faced. The success rate was low. The valley was still unforgiving, still dangerous. But occasionally a pilot would thread that needle, approach at the right angle, use terrain masking effectively, put rounds precisely on target, and egress clean. When they did, instructors would nod approvingly. "That's a Keller run," they'd say, the highest compliment. Doing it the way she'd taught, the way she'd demonstrated, the way she'd proven possible. In academies and squadrons worldwide, her name became shorthand for professional excellence. Be like Keller meant study harder, fly better, never quit. It meant competence without excuses, performance without drama, excellence as a baseline rather than an exception. New pilots learned about her in their initial training. She became part of the foundation of Air Force culture, like Boyd or Olds. A figure whose contributions transcended their individual career and shaped how generations thought about the profession of arms. Historians debated her place in military history. Some argued she should be ranked among the greatest combat aviators. Others said her impact was more cultural than tactical, but everyone agreed on one thing: she'd mattered. Her life had made a difference. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask. To have lived, to have served, to have left the world better than you found it. Raven Keller had done that. Not through speeches or politics, but through the cumulative weight of thousands of decisions made correctly, missions flown professionally, and standards upheld unwaveringly. The final tribute came from an unexpected source. 50 years after her death, a Joint Special Operations Unit was training for a high-risk mission. The briefing officer, discussing close air support integration, pulled up a historical example to illustrate proper tactics. November 7, he said, displaying the mission overview. "Captain Keller, 2025. This is the standard. Study this mission. Understand what she did and why she did it. Then go execute at that level." The room of elite operators studied the footage. They saw what she'd seen: the impossible geography, the desperate situation, the vanishingly small margin for error. They watched her make the approach, execute the gun run, pull off target, and do it again. Professional, precise, effective. One of the operators spoke up. "Sir, the pilot on this mission, Keller, she's the one they named that A-10 after, right? And the trophy, and about a dozen other things." She became a general, changed how the Air Force thinks about close air support, and mentored hundreds of pilots who went on to distinguished careers. But this mission, right here, is why we remember her. Because when it mattered most, she delivered. The operator nodded. "That's the standard." "That's always been the standard," the briefing officer replied. "Keller just made it visible." The mission launched 3 days later. When the team encountered heavy resistance and called for air support, an A-10 responded. The pilot, a major with 8 years of experience, rolled in on target with textbook precision. Gun runs that were aggressive but controlled, devastating but precise. The team extracted successfully, 0 casualties. In the after-action report, the team leader wrote, "Air support was exceptional. Pilot demonstrated Keller-level competence under fire. Recommend commendation." That phrase, Keller-level competence, had entered the lexicon. It meant the highest standard, the benchmark against which excellence was measured. Raven would have found the attention uncomfortable. She'd never sought fame, never wanted to be anyone's icon. She just wanted to fly, to do the mission, to bring everyone home. But she would have understood the value in having a standard, in giving people something to aspire to, a concrete example of excellence they could emulate. The last person who'd flown with Raven personally died at age 97. With her death, direct connection to Raven's active service was severed. Now all that remained was the historical record, videos, photos, documents, and the stories passed down. But history had a way of preserving what mattered. And what mattered about Raven Keller wasn't the tactical details of specific missions or the political context of her barrier breaking. What mattered was the demonstration that excellence was achievable through dedication, that barriers were surmountable through competence, and that one person's commitment to doing things right could influence an entire institution. Her father had been right, all those years ago when he told her to fly because she loved it, not to prove anything. The love of flying had sustained her through challenges that would have broken someone motivated by vindication or anger. Because she loved the work itself, she'd been willing to do it at the highest level, regardless of recognition. That was the final lesson, the most enduring lesson. Do the work because the work matters, not because others are watching. Excellence for its own sake, not for external validation. That philosophy had guided her from that first flight in a Cessna over Nebraska to commanding wings and shaping doctrine. It had made her undeniable, had given her a legacy that outlasted her life, had inspired generations of pilots who never knew her personally. In the end, Raven Keller's story wasn't about being a woman in a male profession. It was about being a professional in a profession that demanded the best. She'd given her best every day, every mission, every decision. Gender had been relevant to how others perceived her, but irrelevant to her ability. And by refusing to let it define her, she'd helped create a world where it didn't define anyone. The story that began with a young girl looking at the sky and dreaming of flight ended with a changed institution and a legacy of excellence. From Nebraska to November 7-4 to the halls of the Pentagon, one woman had proven that the only ceiling that mattered was the one in the sky. And that ceiling was infinite. For Raven Keller, that had always been enough. The sky, the aircraft, the mission. Everything else was just noise. In her life, she'd flown through that noise with the same precision she'd brought to combat missions. Focused, professional, unwavering. The result was a career that spoke for itself and a legacy that would echo through military aviation for as long as aircraft flew and pilots pushed the limits of what was possible. On a clear day, at the precise coordinates of November 7-4, if you listen carefully, some say you can still hear the distant howl of turbofan engines and the distinctive brrrrt of a GAU-8 cannon. It's imagination, of course. Atmospheric conditions, wind through the rocks, nothing more. But the pilots who fly that valley swear there's something more. A presence. A standard. A reminder that this is where someone proved that courage and competence could overcome any obstacle. They call it Fury's echo, the sound of excellence that never fades no matter how much time passes. And whether it's real or mythic doesn't matter, because Raven Keller's true echo isn't a sound. It's every pilot who flies a perfect mission, every leader who demands excellence without excusing mediocrity, every person who refuses to accept limitations imposed by others' narrow thinking. That's the echo that matters. That's the legacy that endures. From the first flight to the last, from the first mission to the thousandth, from Nebraska to the Pentagon and everywhere in between, Raven Keller flew her life with the same precision she brought to combat. On course, on target, always bringing everyone home. In the end, what more could any warrior ask than to have served well, to have made a difference, and to have left a legacy worth following? Raven had done all three. The sky had been her canvas. Excellence had been her brush. And the masterpiece she'd created was visible in every generation of pilots who followed, flying with competence, courage, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. That was Fury. That was Keller. That was the story. And though the woman was gone, the legend flew on.